By the time Naomi Brooks was brought through the back entrance of the precinct, the rain had turned the parking lot into a sheet of black glass. Fluorescent lights buzzed above the booking desk, pale and tired, making every face look harder than it needed to be. Officer Daniel Whitaker walked in ahead of her like the building belonged to him, one hand resting near his belt, his jaw set in that practiced expression men use when they have mistaken control for character. He had been on the force for 22 years, long enough for younger officers to lower their voices when he passed, and old enough to believe that every complaint against him was just another person trying to ruin a good cop. Behind him came Officer Ryan Cole, 29, clean-cut, restless, and eager to laugh at whatever Whitaker decided was funny. Ryan still had the shine of someone new to power, someone who had not yet learned how dangerous it was to admire the wrong man. At the far end of the room, Lieutenant Elaine Porter stood with a paper cup of coffee cooling in her hand, watching the scene with the quiet exhaustion of a woman who had signed too many reports and asked too few questions. She knew Whitaker's file better than anyone. She knew about the traffic stops that lasted too long, the missing footage, the statements that sounded copied from one incident to the next. She knew which neighborhoods he drove through slowly and which drivers he seemed to see as guilty before they spoke. But Porter had built a career on keeping problems contained, and in that precinct, contained usually meant buried. Naomi stood near the counter, wrists free now, but dignity still held tight around her like a coat in winter. Her dark suit was damp at the shoulders from the walk through the rain. Her leather folder, the sealed court file she had carried that morning, lay on the desk between Whitaker and the booking clerk as if it were evidence of some imaginary crime. Whitaker tapped it with 2 fingers and gave Naomi a thin smile. "So tell me again," he said, loud enough for the room to hear, "how a woman driving a 12-year-old sedan ends up with federal court documents on the passenger seat." Ryan chuckled under his breath. The clerk looked down, pretending to read the screen. Naomi answered calmly, "Because they belong to me." The words did not rise. They did not shake. That made them land harder. Whitaker's smile faded by a fraction. "You a lawyer now?" Naomi held his gaze. "I told you my name. I told you where I was going. I requested that you verify my identification through the proper channel." Ryan leaned against the counter, arms folded, amused by her composure. "Proper channel," he repeated, stretching the words like a joke. "She talks like a courthouse brochure." A few officers nearby glanced over, then away. No one wanted to step into Whitaker's weather. Porter finally moved from the hallway, her heels clicking softly against the tile. "What do we have?" she asked, though her eyes stayed on Naomi just a little too long. Whitaker straightened. "Suspicious documents, failure to comply, possible obstruction." She got mouthy during the stop. Naomi turned to Porter. "Lieutenant, your officer stopped me without stating a lawful reason, refused to provide a clear explanation, and ignored my request to preserve camera footage." Porter's fingers tightened around the coffee cup. For one small second, something like recognition crossed her face. Not recognition of Naomi's identity, but recognition of trouble. Real trouble. The kind that did not stay inside a report. Whitaker saw it too, and his pride shifted into anger. "You hear that?" he said, looking around the room. "She walks in here telling us how to do our jobs." Naomi did not look away. Someone should. The room changed temperature. It was not dramatic. No one gasped. No thunder cracked outside. But the air hardened, and every officer nearby understood that a line had been crossed, not by Naomi, but in Whitaker's mind. He stepped closer to the desk and lowered his voice. "You think being calm makes you important?" Naomi looked at the old clock above the booking window. It was 7:18 in the morning. She had been due at the courthouse in 42 minutes. "No," she said. "I think records matter." Ryan's grin slipped. Porter looked toward the ceiling camera, then toward the hallway that led to the holding rooms. Whitaker followed her glance and gave a short, humorless laugh. "Records," he said. "Fine. Let us make one." He picked up the folder and handed it to Ryan. "Log this." Then he looked at Naomi, not as a person, but as an inconvenience he intended to shrink. "Put her in holding until we sort out who she really is." Porter opened her mouth, then closed it. That silence told Naomi almost everything. The badge, the desk, the polished shoes, the chain of command, all of it had made a machine around one man's prejudice. And now the machine was moving. Naomi breathed once, slow and quiet, feeling the cold air from the vent brush against the back of her neck. Her mother's voice came back to her, soft as a hand smoothing hair before church. "Baby, when they try to make you small, stand so still they have to see themselves." So Naomi stood still. She let them think they had the room. She let them think they had the story. But as Whitaker led the way down the hallway, she noticed the small red light above the corner camera blinking through the dimness, steady as a heartbeat, watching everything they believed no one would ever prove. The hallway to holding was narrow and colder than the booking room, with beige walls, dull floor tiles, and old vents pushing air that smelled faintly of dust and rain-soaked uniforms. Naomi walked between Officer Whitaker and Officer Cole without rushing, her posture straight, her hands relaxed at her sides now that the cuffs had been removed for processing. She could hear the precinct breathing around her, phones ringing behind closed doors, a printer grinding somewhere near records, a radio murmuring codes that rose and faded like static from another world. Whitaker moved with the confidence of a man certain the hallway itself would protect him. Ryan carried Naomi's sealed folder under one arm, flipping the corner with his thumb as if touching it gave him permission to understand it. Naomi stopped just before the holding room door. "Officer Cole," she said evenly, "that folder is sealed under federal court authority. You need to place it in evidence custody without opening, bending, copying, photographing, or removing any page." Ryan's hand froze. Whitaker turned slowly, his expression sharpening. "You giving orders now?" Naomi looked at him, then at the ceiling camera above the hallway junction. "No, I am informing you of the legal chain of custody before another mistake is made." The words settled into the corridor with quiet weight. Ryan glanced at Whitaker, suddenly less amused. Lieutenant Porter had followed them halfway down the hall, stopping near a gray filing cabinet with her coffee still in hand. Naomi saw her there, listening. "Lieutenant Porter," Naomi continued, "I am again requesting that all patrol car footage, body camera footage, hallway surveillance, booking logs, radio traffic, and access records connected to this stop be preserved immediately." Porter's face tightened. Whitaker gave a short laugh, but it had lost its ease. "You hear yourself?" he asked. "You sound like you have been watching too many courthouse shows." Naomi did not answer the insult. She simply turned her body enough, so her voice carried toward the camera, the lieutenant, and the open doorway behind them. "For the record, I have not resisted, I have not threatened anyone, and I have repeatedly asked for identification verification. I am also requesting counsel before answering any questions." Ryan's eyes dropped to the folder again. A small crease had formed near one corner where his thumb had pressed too hard. He suddenly held it more carefully. Whitaker stepped closer, close enough for Naomi to smell coffee on his breath and rain on his jacket, but she did not move back. He wanted fear or anger, or at least a flinch he could rename as attitude. Naomi gave him stillness instead. That made the silence worse for him. "You think those cameras save you?" he said softly. "I think truth needs witnesses," Naomi replied. "And sometimes witnesses are machines people forget to fear." From the end of the hall, a young records clerk named Amelia Torres looked up from a cart of files. She had been rolling past when Naomi spoke, and now she stood frozen with one hand on the cart handle. She was barely 23, new enough to still believe rules meant something, experienced enough to know when they were being stepped over. Porter noticed Amelia watching and lowered her eyes. Whitaker noticed too. His jaw flexed. "Get back to work," he snapped. Amelia pushed the cart a few inches, but not far. Naomi saw her glance at the red camera light, then at the sealed folder under Ryan's arm. It was a tiny movement, almost nothing, but Naomi caught it. Someone else was remembering. Whitaker opened the holding room door with more force than necessary, though he kept his face calm. Inside was a plain metal bench, a scratch table, and a wall clock that ticked too loudly. Naomi paused at the threshold. "Before I enter, I want my request logged. Preservation of all recordings. Verification of my identification. Counsel present for questioning. Medical documentation of any condition at release. Return of all court property intact." Ryan swallowed. "She really does talk like a judge," he muttered, trying to make it sound funny. Naomi turned her head slightly. "No," she said. "I talk like someone who knows what happens when powerful people believe paperwork is beneath them." The hallway went quiet again. Even the radio seemed to fade. Whitaker's face darkened, not with sudden rage, but with the slower anger of a man losing control of the version of events he had planned to write. Porter finally spoke, her voice low. "Cole, take the folder to evidence. Do not open it." Ryan blinked. Whitaker looked back at her. "Lieutenant." Porter did not meet his eyes. "Do it." For the first time since the traffic stop, something shifted. It was small but real. Naomi stepped into the holding room on her own, not because they had won, but because she had chosen the ground where truth would stand. Behind her, the door remained open for several seconds. In that gap, she saw Amelia at the end of the hall quietly take out her phone, not to record a scene, but to note the time. 7:26 in the morning. The minute the story began slipping out of Whitaker's hands, the holding room door closed with a soft click, and the sound felt heavier than it should have. Naomi stood for a moment in the center of the room, beneath a ceiling light that hummed with a tired electrical pulse, letting her eyes adjust to the flat gray walls and the scratched metal bench. The clock above the door reads 7:28 in the morning. Every minute mattered now. In less than an hour, Courtroom 14 would be filling with clerks, attorneys, reporters, and families waiting for a civil rights hearing that had already been delayed twice. Her hearing, her first public morning on the bench in this district. Outside the room, voices moved in low waves, too muffled to understand, but sharp enough to carry tension. Naomi sat down slowly, folded her hands, and breathed through the cold air. She thought of the sealed folder, of the injunction draft inside, of the complaint against several officers whose names had repeated across too many cases. Daniel Whitaker was one of those names. She had seen it at midnight, printed in black ink, surrounded by dates, traffic stops, missing footage, settlements paid quietly by the city. She had not expected to meet him before court. She had not expected him to place himself inside the very story he thought he controlled. The door opened again. Whitaker stepped in first, his face arranged into calm authority. Ryan Cole followed but stayed near the wall. No folder now, no grin either. Lieutenant Porter stood in the doorway and did not enter. That mattered. She wanted distance. She wanted the room to belong to someone else. Whitaker placed a blank form on the table. "Sign this statement," he said. Naomi looked at the paper but did not touch it. "I will not sign a document that contains false claims. You have not read it. Your first line says I became aggressive during the stop." Ryan looked down. Porter's jaw shifted. Whitaker tapped the paper once. "You are making this harder than it has to be." Naomi lifted her eyes. "No, Officer Whitaker. I am making it accurate." His expression thinned. For a few seconds, no one spoke. The clock ticked with almost insulting patience. Then Whitaker turned toward the camera mounted high in the corner of the room. "That one work?" he asked Ryan, too casually. Ryan hesitated. "I think so." Porter answered from the doorway, voice quiet. "It is part of the building system, not our body camera server." Naomi watched Whitaker absorb that. A small detail had become a wall he had not seen. His control did not reach every wire in the building. "Then we will move," he said. Porter frowned. "Daniel." He ignored her and looked back at Naomi. "You are going to stop performing for cameras." Naomi stood, not quickly, not defiantly, just with the steady movement of someone refusing to be handled by fear. "I am not performing. I am preserving the truth." That sentence changed him. Not loudly, not all at once, but something behind his eyes hardened into humiliation. He opened the door and motioned toward the smaller interview room across the hall, a room with an old table, 2 chairs, and no visible camera above the frame. Naomi saw it immediately. So did Porter. So did Amelia Torres, who had appeared near the records card again, pretending to sort files with hands that were no longer steady. As Naomi crossed the hallway, her reflection passed over the dark glass of a vending machine. Damp suit, lifted chin, locks resting over one shoulder, still carrying rain from the morning. Whitaker saw her notice herself, and his mouth curled with something cold and personal. "That pride is the problem," he said. Naomi stopped just inside the smaller room. "My dignity is not your problem." Ryan looked at the floor. Porter turned away, then stopped herself, as if some buried part of her had finally grown tired of looking elsewhere. Whitaker stepped to the table and picked up a pair of office scissors used for cutting evidence tags, then set them down again, as if even he understood the line his own anger was approaching. The room held its breath. Naomi did not move. She did not give him the fear he wanted. She only looked at the doorway, where Porter stood frozen, and said, "Lieutenant, you can still choose what kind of witness you are." Outside, a phone rang once, twice, then went silent. Somewhere in the building, the courthouse calendar continued without her. Unaware that the judge assigned to hear the city's buried truth was standing in a back room of a precinct, watching the people named in that truth decide how much deeper they were willing to go. Porter spoke before Whitaker could move again, and her voice came out smaller than her rank should have allowed. "Daniel, step outside." The words did not sound brave, but they were enough to break the room open. Whitaker turned toward her, stunned that anyone in his own house would interrupt him. Ryan looked up so fast his shoulder brushed the wall. Naomi stayed still, her hands resting at her sides, feeling the thin line between danger and record, between fear and law, between what had happened to so many others and what might finally be seen. Porter did not repeat herself. She only looked at the office scissors on the table, then at Naomi, then at the hallway where Amelia Torres stood frozen beside the cart. That was when the silence changed. It no longer belonged to Whitaker. He gave a hard, humorless breath, pushed past Porter, and disappeared into the hall. Ryan followed after a second, leaving the smaller interview room suddenly too quiet. Porter remained at the door, one hand on the frame, unable to meet Naomi's eyes. "You need to go," she said. Naomi looked at the clock on the wall. 7:41 in the morning. "My property," she said. Porter nodded once, then turned toward Ryan's direction. "Your folder is in evidence. I will have it released." Naomi heard the strain beneath the words, the sound of a woman trying to step backward from a cliff after years of walking toward it. "And the recordings?" Naomi asked. Porter closed her eyes for half a second. "I will preserve what I can." Naomi's answer was quiet. "That is not the same as preserving everything." Porter flinched as if the sentence had found a bruise. 10 minutes later, Naomi walked out of the precinct through a side door with her sealed folder pressed against her chest and a property envelope in her hand. The rain had stopped, but the city still looked wet and unsettled, curbs shining, gutters whispering, the morning sky hanging low over Baltimore like gray cloth. Her sedan had been left near the curb, tires close to the painted line, windshield dotted with beads of water. She unlocked the door, sat behind the wheel, and for the first time since the stop, let her hands tremble. Not from weakness, from the body finally understanding it had survived a room where dignity had been treated like a challenge. She took one breath, then another. The courthouse was 9 minutes away if traffic stayed light. She drove without turning on the radio. The city moved around her in ordinary pieces, a school bus groaning at an intersection, a man in a Ravens hoodie carrying coffee, a woman jogging past a row of brick townhomes with her dog trotting beside her. Life had continued while Naomi had been measured, doubted, and nearly erased inside a building paid for by the public. That thought sat in her chest like a stone. At the federal courthouse, the underground parking garage smelled of concrete, old rain, and engine heat. Naomi parked in her assigned space, turned off the car, and sat in the dimness while the dashboard clock changed to 7:58. Court staff would be looking for her. Reporters would be waiting. The city's attorneys would be shuffling papers, unaware that the judge had arrived carrying more than a docket. She stepped into the private restroom beside Chambers and locked the door. The mirror over the sink was wide and unforgiving. In it, Naomi saw damp shoulders, tired eyes, and the white scarf she had pulled from her glove compartment before leaving the precinct, a simple cotton scarf her mother had once used at the salon. She had wrapped it not to hide, but to hold herself together until she could breathe. Slowly, she removed it and looked at herself fully. No audience, no officer, no clerk, just her own reflection beneath the clean courthouse lights. The woman in the mirror did not look untouched. She looked tested. Her mother's voice rose inside her again, warm and steady, from Saturday mornings when the salon smelled of shea butter, coffee, and hot combs cooling on folded towels. "Baby, do not let anyone make you ashamed of what carries your history." Naomi placed both palms on the sink and lowered her head. For 3 seconds, she allowed the pain to exist without turning it into evidence, without naming it for a courtroom, without making it useful to anyone else. Then she lifted her face, washed her hands, adjusted the white scarf with slow precision, and opened the folder on the counter. The first page carried the case name that had brought her here: Miller v. City of Baltimore, emergency hearing on civil rights violations, and evidence preservation. Under the list of officers connected to prior complaints, one name stared back at her in black ink. Daniel Whitaker. Naomi touched the paper once, not in anger, but in recognition. Outside the restroom, the courthouse bell chimed the hour. 8 o'clock. She picked up her robe from Chambers, slid her arms into the black fabric, and felt its weight settle over her shoulders like a promise. The hallway beyond her door had gone quiet. Waiting quiet. The kind of quiet that comes before a truth enters the room. The courtroom was already full when Marcus Reed stepped to the center aisle, his dark suit pressed sharp, his security badge catching the morning light from the high windows. He had worked federal courthouse security for 11 years, long enough to recognize the difference between ordinary silence and the kind that arrives when people are waiting for power to enter. Attorneys filled the front tables with laptops open and case files stacked beside paper coffee cups. Reporters lined the back row, whispering into phones. Along the left side sat families from East Baltimore, West Baltimore, and the county line, people who had spent years filing complaints that became numbers, numbers that became closed letters that became nothing. Near the city's table, Officer Daniel Whitaker sat with his arms folded, wearing a navy suit instead of a uniform, his expression calm again, rebuilt during the short ride from the precinct. Ryan Cole sat 2 seats away, hands clasped too tightly, eyes moving from the bench to the doors and back again. Lieutenant Elaine Porter entered last and stood near the aisle, face pale under the courthouse lights. She had not expected the emergency hearing to happen so quickly. She had not expected to see Whitaker's name on the witness list. And she had certainly not expected the woman from the holding room to be anywhere near this courtroom. Grace Miller, the public defender who had filed the emergency motion, looked down at her notes with tired concentration. She had been fighting this case for 14 months, gathering statements from drivers, teenagers, mothers, nurses, delivery workers, veterans, and one 72-year-old church deacon who said Officer Whitaker had left him standing beside his car in the rain for 40 minutes while his wife called every hospital in the city looking for him. Grace had expected resistance from the city. She had expected delays, missing files, careful language, and the usual argument that no pattern existed. What she had not expected was the strange message her office received at 7:49 that morning from a young records clerk inside the precinct. A message with only 4 words and a timestamp. Preserve hallway camera now. The clerk's name was Amelia Torres. Grace had not replied. She had simply printed the message and placed it in her folder beneath the motion. At 8:03, Marcus Reed glanced toward the side door beside the bench. The clerk of court, Ellen Hart, rose from her chair and smoothed the front of her jacket. The murmur in the gallery faded. Whitaker leaned back as if ready to be bored. Ryan swallowed hard. Porter gripped the edge of the aisle seat, but did not sit down. Then Ellen's voice rang across the room, clear and formal. All rise. Chairs scraped softly against the floor. The entire courtroom stood. For one suspended second, nothing happened. Then the side door opened. Naomi Brooks stepped through in a black judicial robe, the white scarf wrapped neatly around her head, her sealed folder in one hand and her face composed with a stillness that seemed to pull the air toward her. The sound vanished from the room. Not faded. Vanished. Whitaker's shoulders lowered by an inch, as though his body had understood before his mind could accept it. Ryan's lips parted, but no sound came out. Porter closed her eyes. Grace Miller stared at the bench, then at Naomi, then back at the nameplate being set into place by the clerk, the Honorable Naomi Brooks. Marcus Reed, who had read every judicial appointment notice posted in the building, recognized her immediately and stood a little straighter. Naomi reached the bench, placed the folder down, and looked over the room. Her eyes passed across the attorneys, the reporters, the families, the city officials, and finally the 3 officers near the counsel table. She did not pause long enough to accuse them. She did not need to. Recognition had already entered the courtroom and taken its seat. Please be seated, Naomi said. Her voice was calm, low, and steady enough to make every whisper feel disrespectful. The room obeyed. Whitaker sat slowly, his hands no longer folded with confidence. Ryan reached for a pen and dropped it. The small plastic sound struck the silence like a pebble in glass. Naomi opened the case file and read the title aloud. Miller v. City of Baltimore. Emergency hearing regarding preservation of evidence, alleged civil rights violations, and law enforcement records. Grace rose carefully. "Good morning, Your Honor." Her voice carried surprise she was trying to hide. The city attorney stood as well, suddenly pale, suddenly aware that the morning had changed shape. Naomi looked toward him. "Counsel, before we begin arguments, I want to address a matter of immediate concern." Whitaker stared at the table. Porter looked at the floor. Ryan had stopped moving entirely. Naomi turned one page, then another. The paper sounded crisp beneath the courtroom microphone. "This court has received credible indication that evidence relevant to this matter may be at risk of alteration, omission, or destruction." The city attorney opened his mouth, but Naomi lifted one hand. Not sharply, simply enough. "You will have your opportunity." He closed his mouth. In the gallery, a mother reached for her son's hand. Amelia Torres had slipped into the back row, still wearing her precinct identification badge under a raincoat, her face tense but present. Naomi saw her. Amelia looked down, then back up. A witness had chosen to remain. Naomi's gaze returned to Whitaker. For the first time since the traffic stop, he could not turn the room into his room. He could not rename silence as compliance. He could not make a report swallow what everyone could now see. Naomi leaned slightly toward the microphone. "Effective immediately, I am ordering preservation of all body camera footage, patrol vehicle recordings, booking logs, hallway surveillance, interview room access records, evidence custody entries, radio transmissions, and internal communications connected to the officers named in this complaint." Her voice did not rise. It did not need to. "No file is to be moved. No recording is to be overwritten. No report is to be amended without direct notice to this court." The court reporter's fingers flew across the machine. The city attorney looked toward Whitaker, and in that glance, something broke loose. The first visible crack between the man who had always been protected and the system that had protected him. Naomi sat back, the white scarf bright against the black robe, her eyes steady on the room that had finally become what it was meant to be. Not a stage for power, a place where truth had permission to speak. Naomi let the order settle before she asked for the first exhibit. Grace Miller stood, careful and controlled, and handed a printed copy of Amelia Torres's message to the clerk. "Your Honor, this was received by my office at 7:49 this morning from a records clerk at the Eastern District Precinct." The city attorney rose at once. "Objection, Foundation." Naomi looked at him, not coldly, but with the kind of patience that made excuses sound smaller. "Noted. Ms. Miller, call your witness." The back row shifted. Amelia Torres stood so quickly her raincoat slipped from one shoulder. She looked younger under the courtroom lights than she had in the hallway. Her face pale, her hands folded together as if she were holding herself upright by force. Marcus Reed guided her to the witness stand with quiet respect. She took the oath, sat down, and looked once toward Lieutenant Porter. Porter did not look away this time. Grace approached with the printed message. "Ms. Torres, did you send this?" Amelia swallowed. "Yes, ma'am." "Why?" Amelia's eyes moved toward Whitaker, then to Naomi, then to the families seated behind Grace. "Because I saw Officer Whitaker bring a woman into holding this morning. I heard her ask for recordings to be preserved. She asked clearly, more than once. And I saw Officer Cole carrying a sealed court folder that did not look like regular property." Whitaker leaned toward the city attorney, whispering sharply, but Naomi lifted her gaze, and the whisper died. Grace asked, "Did anything concern you after that?" Amelia nodded. Officer Whitaker asked whether one of the cameras worked. Then he moved her toward a smaller room. The gallery went still. Naomi did not move. She gave no sign that the words belonged to her own mourning. That restraint pressed harder on the room than anger could have. Grace turned to the bench. "Your Honor, we request immediate production of the hallway system from 7:15 to 7:45 before any routine override can occur." The city attorney stood again, now less certain. "The city needs time to review any footage before public presentation." Naomi looked down at the file, then back up. "Counsel, this is an emergency preservation hearing. The issue is not public relations. The issue is whether evidence exists and whether it remains intact." She turned to the clerk. "Contact the courthouse technology officer assigned to city systems compliance. I want confirmation that the precinct's building surveillance backup has been secured." A stir moved through the city's table. Whitaker's face tightened, but for the first time, he looked less angry than exposed. Minutes passed with the thick sound of paper, keyboards, and held breath. Then the courtroom deputy returned with a small flash drive sealed in a plastic evidence sleeve. "Your Honor," Marcus Reed said, receiving it from the deputy. The backup file was retrieved from the municipal building archive. Chain of custody begins with the technology officer at 8:22 this morning. Naomi nodded. Play only the hallway segment relevant to the preservation request. The monitor near the jury box flickered on. The image was grainy, colorless, and high-angled, but clear enough. The courtroom saw Naomi in the precinct hallway, standing straight beneath the camera. They saw Ryan with the sealed folder. They saw Porter listening. They heard Naomi's voice, calm through the speaker, requesting preservation of patrol car footage, body camera footage, hallway surveillance, booking logs, radio traffic, and access records. They heard Whitaker mock her words. They heard Naomi say, "I think truth needs witnesses." No one breathed loudly. No one shifted. Then the recording showed the moment Ryan was told to take the folder to evidence. It showed Amelia at the records cart, looking up. It showed Porter's hesitation. It showed Whitaker watching the camera with the expression of a man realizing too late that the ceiling had eyes. Naomi stopped the playback before the smaller room. "That is sufficient for this stage." Grace Miller's eyes were wet, but her voice held. "Your Honor, this supports our request for an independent evidence monitor and immediate suspension of internal access by the officers named in the complaint." The city attorney looked toward Whitaker, then away, making the choice every institution makes when protection becomes more expensive than truth. "The city will not oppose preservation by an independent monitor," he said quietly. In the second row, a mother covered her mouth. A man in a work jacket stared at the floor as if afraid hope might disappear if he looked directly at it. Naomi wrote one line on the order before speaking. "The court appoints an independent monitor effective immediately. All relevant materials are to be secured by 5 p.m. Eastern Time today. Officers Daniel Whitaker and Ryan Cole are restricted from accessing, editing, reviewing, or influencing any evidence connected to this matter. Lieutenant Elaine Porter will provide a sworn statement regarding preservation procedures by noon tomorrow." Porter bowed her head. Ryan closed his eyes. Whitaker finally stood. "Your Honor, this is personal." The entire courtroom seemed to recoil from the mistake in that sentence. Naomi looked at him for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was softer than anyone expected. "No, Officer Whitaker. Personal is what happens in rooms without witnesses. This is law." The words landed without thunder, without cruelty, without revenge. Just wait. Just consequence. Marcus Reed stepped slightly closer to the aisle as Whitaker sat back down, smaller now, not because Naomi had humiliated him, but because truth had removed the borrowed height of his badge. Grace Miller lowered her head over her notes, letting one silent tear fall where no camera could catch it. Amelia Torres exhaled like someone returning to her own body. And from the gallery, the families who had waited years for someone to believe their records finally heard the sound they had been denied for too long. A judge's gavel, clean and steady, bringing silence to power. By late afternoon, the courthouse had changed its sound. Morning had been full of whispers, footsteps, camera shutters, and the nervous rustle of paper, but now the halls carried a quieter weight, the kind that comes after a door has finally opened and everyone knows the air on the other side is real. Naomi Brooks remained on the bench until the final order was signed, the independent monitor appointed, the evidence transfer scheduled, and every attorney in the room understood that nothing connected to the case would disappear into a drawer again. Officer Whitaker left under administrative restriction, escorted not in handcuffs, but without the authority he had worn like armor for 22 years. Ryan Cole walked behind him with his eyes fixed on the floor, no longer laughing, no longer young in the same way he had been that morning. Lieutenant Elaine Porter paused near the aisle before leaving, as if some apology had risen to her throat and found no language strong enough to carry it. Naomi did not look for one. Some things did not need to be forgiven before they were corrected. Some silences had to become testimony first. When the courtroom emptied, Grace Miller stayed behind for a moment, gathering her folders slowly. "Your Honor," she said, her voice careful. Naomi looked up from the order. Grace seemed to search for the right words, then gave up trying to make them perfect. "Thank you for hearing them." Naomi glanced toward the gallery where the families had sat. Now only empty benches marked by the faint warmth of bodies that had waited too long. The record was always speaking, Naomi said. The court just needed to stop covering its ears. Grace nodded, pressing her lips together, then left before emotion could ask more of her than professionalism allowed. Marcus Reed remained by the side door, hands folded in front of him. He had seen judges leave angry, tired, proud, and distant. He had never seen one carry a whole morning in the tilt of her shoulders and still walk as if the row belonged to the people watching from the back row. "Judge Brooks," he said softly. Naomi turned. He did not salute her. This was not the military. This was not ceremony. He simply stood straighter, giving respect the shape it deserved. "Your car is ready downstairs." She nodded. "Thank you, Mr. Reed." He opened the private corridor door, and she stepped through into the softer light behind the courtroom. In chambers, the black robe came off slowly. Its weight left her shoulders, but not entirely. Some garments are removed from the body and remain on the soul. Naomi folded it over the chair, then looked at the white scarf in the mirror. The cotton had loosened slightly during the hearing. A few edges had shifted near her temple. She adjusted it with both hands, careful and gentle, as if touching someone else who had made it through. Her sealed folder lay on the desk beside the signed order. Under Daniel Whitaker's name, the clerk had added a new notation: evidence preservation mandatory, independent review pending. It was not the ending. It was only the first clean line in a record that had been smudged for years. Outside, Baltimore glowed after rain, brick buildings darkened red, sidewalks shining, traffic moving in slow silver streams below the courthouse steps. Naomi drove not to her apartment, not yet, but across town to a small salon on a corner near North Avenue, where the sign in the window read Brooks Beauty and Braids, though her mother had been gone for 6 years. The new owner, Mrs. Althea Johnson, was locking up when Naomi arrived. Althea was 71, with gold glasses, soft hands, and a memory that held half the neighborhood. She saw Naomi through the glass and stopped turning the key. No questions came first. No shock. No pity. She opened the door and let Naomi in. The salon smelled like coconut oil, clean towels, and the faint sweetness of old hair spray baked into the walls. Naomi stood under the warm lights while Althea gently touched the edge of the white scarf. "Baby," the older woman said, her voice almost a whisper, "come sit down." Naomi sat in the same second chair where her mother used to braid children's hair on Saturday mornings, where girls learned patience, women traded news, and nobody ever had to explain why hair could be memory, language, crown, and home all at once. Althea removed the scarf slowly, with the care of someone uncovering a wound without treating it like shame. Naomi looked into the mirror. For the first time all day, there was no courtroom behind her, no officer, no attorney, no camera, no public record. Just her face. Just the truth of what had been taken and what had not. Althea rested both hands on Naomi's shoulders. "It will grow back," she said. Naomi's eyes shone, but she smiled. "I know." Outside the window, the last sunlight slipped between buildings and laid a gold line across the salon floor. Naomi reached up, touched her head, then lowered her hand to the armrest of the chair. The city kept moving beyond the glass. Somewhere, evidence was being sealed. Somewhere, a young clerk was learning that one message could matter. Somewhere, families who had been ignored were telling each other what happened in court. Naomi breathed in the warm salon air and closed her eyes. Not in defeat, not in hiding. In peace, the first small piece of it. And in the mirror, beneath the white light, the silence around her no longer sounded empty. It sounded like justice finally learning how to stay.